All right, welcome to the week two forum. This week, again, we're looking at two chapters, chapter three on federalism and chapter four, or not chapter four, but the state and local government supplement at the back of the text. Now, again, like I said, this is a tough chapter. I hope that you guys are going to ask lots of questions because if I'm seeing lots of questions in the forum, that means you are engaging with the material and you're probably struggling with it a little bit, and that'll put me in a position where I can try to clarify things. So, when again, to me, the biggest part of the problem with federalism is that there's lots and lots of moving parts, and the meaning of federalism evolves quite a bit over time. Historically, the longest period of federalism was, of course, the period of dual federalism, which pretty much you have a brief period of nation building that happens between 1787 when the Constitution goes into effect and kind of the early 19th century where certain decisions get made at the Supreme Court. And it's important to keep in mind the Supreme Court is the arbiter of federalism. They basically are oftentimes in the position of saying what the relationship is between the federal government and the state and local governments are, right? So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Um, so for a long period of time, the argument was this kind of dual, federalism layer cake. The national government has a zone of sovereignty, the state governments have a zone of sovereignty, and there really is no relationship, formally speaking, right? That comes to an end with the Civil War. And it's important to keep in mind it's sort of an explanatory variable, right? What causes federalism to change? It's oftentimes these kind of tumultuous events. The Civil War kind of ends federalism and really kind of launches a period where, up until the Civil War, you really had two very separate kind of tracks in the American experiment. One in the North was kind of with this idea of increasingly relying or trusting in citizens and giving citizens a greater and greater voice. And then in the South, you basically had an authoritarian system where slavery was in place and where, basically slave owners who were the wealthiest members of Southern society basically controlled things. And so in the aftermath of the Civil War, you get, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which were designed basically to say, we're not going to allow this dual track experiment anymore. Democracy is going to prevail. We are going to impose democratic forms of government over the South. Now, that's not what actually happens, right? Because in the South, um, very quickly, the white, kind of wealthiest members of society very quickly seized control of government and basically began waging a Cold War over, whether they were right or not, or whether they had a right to organize their states the way they did. And so that's kind of a matter for, next week when we start dealing with civil liberties and civil rights. But for now, you understand that, the Civil War basically was a point at which the meaning of federalism fundamentally changes. Okay. The next event really, and it's important to keep in mind, the Civil War didn't really end this idea of dual federalism. The Supreme Court continues to interpret that relationship in kind of layer cake terms. What ultimately brings an end to the idea, this traditional system, is one of the ways that it's described, is the Great Depression. And again, what was going on from really the late 19th century until 1929 is that the economy has exploded. More and more people are living in cities. There's a huge movement both of immigration, waves of people coming in, Europeans coming in to the Atlantic coast, Asians coming in to the West Coast, and there is this enormous energy taking place. And industrialization changes the relationship between the state governments and citizens, and between the federal government and the state, and that increasingly begins manifesting itself in the progressive era, where people are beginning to recognize that just intense industrialization is producing the kinds of wealth that is really once again creating huge amounts of inequality. And so that's sort of the starting point. So you get an idea of why the meaning of federalism is evolving. It's because we're changing, right, as a people. And of course, now we're at an even, at a dynamic, kind of turning point where again, what is the nature of our relationship? Okay. With state and local government, again, this is kind of a structure thing. You're looking at different, why do we have states? To a large extent, it's because, the states existed prior to the Constitution, right? What kind of state governments are there? There are, you know, the Constitution basically says every state will have a Republican government, but that has different meanings in different states. What role, do local governments play? The role of unfunded mandates, that the federal government pushes requirements down on the states, and then the states oftentimes push down requirements on the local governments. And so there's, again, a lot of material to cover. Don't feel like you have to, memorize every sentence. Focus on the important stuff, and then things that you don't understand, remember, ask me in the forum. That's always important, right? The more questions I get, the the greater the sense I get that you're engaging with the material, and that you have these points at which, if you can't tell me, if you can't relate, right, what's going on, then that's when you want to ask a question, because that gives me that opportunity to try and make things clear to you. Okay, so let's have a great week of discussion. Again, remember, there's a lot of material, so let's bore in and focus for this week and have a great discussion.